Take a look at this narrow band of rock in the Beartooth Mountains of southern Montana. In most places, it is barely a few feet thick, thinner than the height of a doorway, buried thousands of feet underground. And yet this single, razor-thin layer of rock is the only significant source of platinum and palladium mined anywhere in the United States. Every catalytic converter built into an American car, every hydrogen fuel cell, every piece of electronics that relies on these metals. If the platinum or palladium inside it was mined domestically, there is a very good chance it came from this exact rock layer. It's called the JM Reef, and it runs for 28 miles through the mountains, so consistent in its mineral content that geologists consider it one of the strangest and richest ore bodies on the entire planet. No other site in the country comes close, which means the entire domestic supply chain for these two metals effectively runs through one narrow seam of rock most Americans have never heard of. So how did this thin band of stone in rural Montana become the entire domestic supply for two of the rarest, most industrially critical metals on Earth? What's actually here? The Stillwater Complex, as the broader formation is known, is currently mined at two sites, the original Stillwater mine and the newer East Boulder mine about 20 miles to the west, both operating deep underground within the Custer and Gallatin National Forests. Together, they produce roughly 500,000 to 600,000 ounces of combined platinum and palladium per year, a mix that runs heavily toward palladium, roughly 78% palladium to 22% platinum. Geologists have repeatedly confirmed that the JM Reef is the highest-grade platinum group metal deposit ever discovered anywhere in the world, richer per ton of rock than even the massive deposits of South Africa's Bushveld complex, which remains the largest platinum group resource on Earth by total volume. Stillwater isn't the biggest. It's simply, ounce for ounce, the richest rock of its kind that has ever been found, and it remains the only known significant platinum group metal source in the entire United States. For comparison, most platinum group deposits mined around the world grade well under 10 grams per ton. Sections of the JM Reef have been measured at grades several times that concentration, packed into a formation you could walk directly over on the surface without ever noticing it was there. A magma chamber frozen in time. To understand why this thin seam is so absurdly rich, you have to go back roughly 2.7 billion years, to a time when the surface of the Earth looked almost nothing like it does today. A massive body of molten rock, a magma chamber many miles across, slowly intruded into the crust in what is now southern Montana. Instead of erupting or cooling quickly, this magma chamber cooled with extraordinary slowness over a very long period of geologic time, and as it did, different minerals crystallized out of the melt at different points and settled toward the bottom of the chamber, layer by layer, almost like sediment settling in a lake. This process is called fractional crystallization, and it produced a rock formation with visibly distinct bands, some rich in one mineral, some in another, stacked on top of each other like the pages of a book. At one very specific point in that slow cooling process, platinum and palladium, elements that don't easily bond into common rock-forming minerals, became concentrated instead into rare sulfide minerals that sank and pooled together into one exceptionally narrow band. That band is the JM Reef, a geological accident so improbably consistent that it has held its rich concentration for nearly 28 miles underground, almost unheard of for a deposit this thin. Most ore bodies this narrow pinch out, fade, or lose their grade within a few hundred meters. The JM Reef does the opposite, holding a remarkably stable width and concentration across a distance longer than most cities, which is exactly why geologists still study Stillwater as one of the best natural laboratories on the planet for understanding how metals separate out of cooling magma in the first place. Sitting untouched for decades. Platinum group metals were actually first noted in the rocks of the Beartooth Mountains in the early 20th century, but for decades nobody could justify mining them. The reef was simply too narrow and too deep to be worth the enormous cost of tunneling this far underground, especially when platinum and palladium had relatively limited industrial demand at the time. That changed through the 1960s and early 1970s as new emissions regulations began requiring catalytic converters in American automobiles, a technology that depends almost entirely on platinum group metals to chemically convert toxic exhaust gases into less harmful emissions. Suddenly, a niche geological curiosity in rural Montana became strategically important. Serious exploration confirmed the extent of the JM Reef in the early 1970s, and full-scale underground mining finally began in 1986 under the newly formed Stillwater Mining Company. Even then, getting the metal out required solving problems most mines never face. The reef is so thin that miners have to follow it with extreme precision, often blasting and drilling within a rock corridor barely wider than a hallway, thousands of feet below the surface of the Beartooth Mountains. A level of underground precision more common in a tunneling project than a traditional open pit mine. In 2000, facing pressure from local conservation groups worried about mine expansion near the pristine Stillwater and Boulder River corridors, the company signed what became known as the Good Neighbor Agreement, an unusual voluntary contract that legally limited how far the mine could expand on the surface and required ongoing environmental monitoring, one of the first agreements of its kind between an American mining company and the communities living around it. The palladium bubble that nearly destroyed it. Stillwater's history includes one of the strangest boom and bust stories in modern American mining, and it has almost nothing to do with the mine itself. In the late 1990s, Russia's Norilsk nickel, which supplies a huge share of the world's palladium as a byproduct of nickel mining, began delaying and restricting its palladium exports. Ford Motor Company, worried about running out of a metal it desperately needed for catalytic converters, began aggressively stockpiling palladium as a hedge against future shortages. That panic buying, combined with tightening global supply, sent palladium prices soaring to more than $1,100 an ounce by the year 2000, an almost unheard of price at the time. Stillwater Mining Company rushed to expand production to cash in, taking on debt to accelerate development of new sections of the reef. Then, just as quickly, the bubble collapsed. Russian exports resumed. Ford was left holding a massive stockpile of palladium it no longer needed at inflated prices, and the company was forced to write down close to $1 billion in losses on its palladium reserves in 2001 alone. Palladium prices crashed, and Stillwater Mining Company, now saddled with expansion debt from a boom that had already ended, came dangerously close to bankruptcy in the years that followed. A sharp reminder that even the richest ore body in the world is only worth what someone is willing to pay for what comes out of it. A South African company buys America's platinum. Stillwater Mining Company survived the crash and spent the 2000s and 2010s rebuilding, gradually expanding operations and opening the newer East Boulder mine nearby. Then, in 2017, in a twist that quietly reshaped who actually controls America's only domestic source of these metals, the South African mining giant Sibanye Gold acquired Stillwater Mining Company outright for $2.2 billion, folding it into a new combined company called Sibanye-Stillwater. The irony is hard to miss. The only significant platinum and palladium mine on American soil, producing metal for American catalytic converters and American industry, is today owned and operated by a company headquartered in Johannesburg, itself the center of the very Bushveld complex that dwarfs Stillwater in total size, even if it can't match Stillwater's grade. The next deposit hiding next door. What most people don't realize is that the JM Reef may not be the only valuable formation buried in this stretch of Montana. A separate junior exploration company, Stillwater Critical Minerals, has spent the last several years drilling an adjacent zone called Stillwater West, running parallel to the existing mines along the same 32-kilometer geological trend. Rather than platinum and palladium alone, this newer target is rich in nickel, copper, and cobalt, the exact battery metals driving the electric vehicle industry, alongside its own share of platinum group metals. Early resource estimates have outlined well over 1 billion pounds of nickel, copper, and cobalt in this adjacent zone, still years away from becoming an active mine, but a sign that the same 2.7 billion-year-old magma chamber may still be holding secrets beyond the reef that's already being worked. Why it matters again right now. In recent years, Stillwater has taken on a new kind of strategic importance. Russia remains one of the largest palladium producers on Earth through Norilsk nickel, and escalating geopolitical tensions and sanctions following Russia's invasion of Ukraine have renewed serious concern in Washington about relying on Russian supply for a metal this critical to the auto industry, hydrogen fuel cells, and increasingly, next-generation electronics. Under the Inflation Reduction Act, platinum group metal production from sites like Stillwater now qualifies for federal production tax credits specifically meant to support critical mineral supply chains that reduce American dependence on adversarial nations. But the mine is not without real problems. Recent production reports through early 2026 have shown output actually declining year over year, driven by lower ore grades and mining quality issues at the East Boulder site, alongside rising costs for labor, electrification upgrades, and royalties. The JM Reef that has produced consistently for nearly 40 years is not infinite, and as easier sections of the ore body are worked through, the mining that remains only gets more technically demanding and more expensive. Every new section of tunnel now has to reach deeper and further from existing infrastructure just to keep production flat, let alone grow it, at exactly the moment the country is asking this single deposit to carry more strategic weight than at any point in its history. So here sits this narrow 2.7 billion-year-old band of rock, thinner than a doorway in most places, buried deep beneath a mountain range in rural Montana, quietly responsible for nearly the entire domestic supply of two of the most industrially essential metals on the planet. It has survived a price bubble that nearly bankrupted the company that mines it, changed hands to a foreign owner, weathered a voluntary environmental agreement that permanently limited its footprint, and is now being leaned on more heavily than ever as the United States tries to reduce its dependence on Russian supply. Just up the same mountain range, an entirely new deposit of battery metals may still be waiting for its own turn. The platinum and palladium were never the hard part. They have been sitting in that exact same layer of rock for almost 3 billion years, wading through ice ages, mountain building, and every stretch of human history before anyone even knew they were there. The hard part, now more than ever, is squeezing enough of it out fast enough to matter. If you want to see more of this, please like and subscribe.